Hi, Cancer. Oh my goodness, guys. The energy coming through already feels really powerful. I pulled your cards and honestly, I had to sit with them for a moment because something about this reading feels different. Okay, this doesn't feel like an ordinary reading. It feels emotional, it feels deeply personal, and it feels like something has been quietly shifting beneath the surface for longer than you realize. You may not have all the answers yet, but I keep feeling that your heart already knows something is changing, something is opening, something you've been sensing but maybe couldn't fully put into words. And the fact that you found this reading right now doesn't feel random. It's almost like your intuition has been trying to guide you toward this moment. So take a deep breath. Get comfortable. Open your heart just a little, because what is coming through today may help you understand why things have felt so different lately. And let's get into your reading, because Cancer, the first thing I'm noticing is that something doesn't feel the same anymore. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Honestly, it feels like you're standing in the middle of a transition that your heart recognized long before your mind did. I'm looking at the moon right now and wow, the energy around this card feels incredibly quiet, not empty, not lonely, just quiet. Like there has been something moving beneath the surface for a while. Something subtle. Something difficult to explain. You know when you wake up one day and the things that used to matter don't seem to pull on you the way they once did? That's what this feels like. Cancer. I keep getting the sense that you've been trying to make sense of your emotions lately. Not because you're confused about who you are, but because you're realizing that certain feelings, certain attachments, and certain expectations no longer fit the version of you that is emerging. And that realization can feel strange, because part of you remembers who you used to be. Part of you remembers what once felt important, but another part of you is beginning to look in a different direction. Okay. As I sit with this energy, the Four of Cups appears beside the moon. And immediately, I feel this distance. Not distance from people necessarily, but distance from things that once brought comfort. It's almost like you're looking at certain situations and asking yourself, why doesn't this feel the same anymore? Why am I no longer excited about things I used to want? Why do I feel like something is missing even when everything looks fine on the outside? Cancer, I don't think anything is wrong with you. I actually think your intuition is becoming louder. And sometimes when that happens, the things that no longer belong in your life begin to lose their grip naturally, not because you're forcing them away, not because you're angry, but because your soul is becoming honest about what it truly needs. Wow, there is a deep emotional maturity showing up here, because I don't see someone rushing toward answers. I see someone slowly listening, someone paying attention, someone beginning to trust their inner voice, even when the path ahead isn't completely clear. And then the Eight of Cups comes into view. And honestly, the moment this card appears, I feel movement, not dramatic movement, not sudden change. Just the quiet awareness that something inside you is ready to leave an old emotional landscape behind. Cancer, I keep hearing the words, I can't go back to being who I was. That's the feeling. You may still be standing in familiar places, talking to familiar people, living a life that looks similar from the outside. But internally, something has shifted. The emotional version of you that carried certain burdens for years is becoming lighter. The version of you that settled for less than what your heart truly wanted is beginning to wake up. And I don't think this happened overnight. I think this has been building for a long time. Little realizations, little disappointments, little moments where your intuition whispered, there's more for you than this. And maybe you ignored it at first. Maybe you doubted it. Maybe you tried to convince yourself that things were fine. But that voice never completely disappeared. It stayed, it waited, and now it feels impossible to ignore. The energy becomes even stronger as judgment appears. And Cancer, this doesn't feel like an outside event. It feels internal. It feels like you're finally hearing something that has been calling your name for a very long time. Not a person, not a situation, yourself, the real you. The version of you that has been waiting patiently beneath responsibilities, expectations, fears, and old emotional stories. I keep feeling this gentle invitation, almost like life is asking you to stop looking backward for confirmation and start paying attention to what your heart is trying to show you right now. Because something is changing. You already know it. That's why this reading feels so emotional. That's why the moon keeps drawing my attention. That's why the Eight of Cups feels so powerful. And that's why judgment feels less like an ending and more like a quiet awakening that has already begun. The old chapter isn't disappearing all at once. It's simply becoming harder and harder to stay inside a version of life that no longer reflects who you're becoming. And Cancer, I feel like your heart has known that for longer than you've been willing to admit. Because as I sit here with your energy, Cancer, I can't help but notice that someone keeps appearing around the edges of this reading. Not loudly, not dramatically, just consistently. It's almost like every time I try to focus entirely on your energy, this person's thoughts drift into the room, and honestly, I don't think they're expecting it either. Wow. The Six of Cups is sitting here now, and the feeling around it is incredibly emotional. Not because someone is stuck in the past. It feels more like someone is finally allowing themselves to look at the past honestly. I keep seeing memories, little moments, conversations that seemed ordinary at the time, things that may have gone unnoticed. But for whatever reason, those memories feel different now. They carry more weight, more meaning, more emotion. And Cancer, I get the feeling that this person has been replaying certain moments over and over again. Not because they're trying to hold on, because they're trying to understand. They're asking themselves questions they never asked before. Questions about what they felt. Questions about what they ignored. Questions about what they may have overlooked while they were busy focusing on everything else. Okay, the energy becomes even softer as Ace of Cups appears. And honestly, this card feels less like a beginning and more like an admission. An emotional admission. A moment where somebody can no longer pretend that what they're feeling isn't real. I keep hearing, I thought this feeling would fade. I thought time would change things. I thought I could move past it. But something didn't disappear. Something remained. And that's what seems to surprise them the most. Because life kept moving. Responsibilities kept happening. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Yet somehow your energy continued to occupy space inside their heart. Not in an obsessive way. Not in a dramatic way. Just quietly. Consistently. Like a song they never completely stopped hearing. There's something very human about this energy. Because I don't see someone who suddenly has all the answers. I see someone slowly becoming honest with themselves. Someone realizing that avoiding a feeling isn't the same as releasing it. And as that realization settles in, the Two of Cups comes forward. The atmosphere shifts immediately. I wish I could explain it. It feels warm, comfortable, familiar. Like the emotional distance they once created no longer feels necessary. It's almost as though they're beginning to understand that what drew them toward you in the first place wasn't something superficial. It wasn't temporary. There was something genuine there, something they couldn't replace, something they couldn't recreate somewhere else no matter how hard they tried. And honestly, that realization seems to be hitting them harder than expected, because the more they reflect, the clearer certain things become. The easier it is to recognize your value, the easier it is to recognize your presence, the easier it is to recognize the impact you had on their life. Wow, the Lovers appears and everything grows very quiet for a moment, not tense, just quiet, like somebody standing at a crossroads inside their own heart. I keep feeling hesitation melting away little by little, not all at once, but enough for them to stop running from what they know, enough for them to stop pretending that certain emotions don't exist. Cancer, what strikes me most is that this energy isn't coming from fantasy, it's coming from clarity, and clarity can be uncomfortable, because once you see something clearly, it's difficult to return to old stories. It's difficult to convince yourself that something didn't matter when deep down you know it did. This person feels closer to that realization than they've ever been before. I keep seeing them sitting alone with their thoughts, thinking about the way you made them feel, thinking about the conversations that stayed with them, thinking about the version of themselves that showed up whenever you were around. And for some reason, that version of themselves feels more authentic than the one they've been trying to hold on to. You know, there are certain connections in life that quietly leave fingerprints on the heart, long after the moment has passed, long after the conversation ends, long after distance enters the picture. And that's exactly what this feels like. Something they thought they could set aside. Something they thought they could explain away. Something they thought would eventually lose its importance. Yet here it is, still present, still alive, still asking to be acknowledged. And the more they listen to that feeling, the harder it becomes to ignore what your presence truly means to them. Because the energy becomes much quieter here, not calmer, just quieter, like someone who has stopped distracting themselves long enough to finally hear their own thoughts. And honestly, Cancer, that's not always an easy place to be. The moment Eight of Swords appears, I feel somebody sitting alone with things they've been avoiding for a very long time. Not avoiding intentionally, more like postponing. Putting certain feelings on a shelf and telling themselves they would deal with them later. But later has arrived, and those feelings are still there. I keep sensing someone replaying moments in their mind, conversations, choices, missed opportunities, things they wish they had handled differently, things they wish they had said, things they wish they had understood sooner. And the strange thing is, The answers they're looking for aren't coming from anyone else. They're coming from inside of them. That's what makes this energy feel so intense. Because nobody is forcing these realizations. Nobody is demanding accountability. They're arriving there on their own. Okay, the room feels heavier as Nine of Swords moves into view, and wow, this card carries a lot of late-night thinking energy. Not sleeping, not resting, just thinking, over and over again, trying to understand how certain things unfolded the way they did. I keep hearing someone ask, what was I afraid of? What was I protecting? What was I running from? And every answer seems to bring them closer to another truth they weren't ready to face before. Because sometimes it's easier to focus on circumstances. It's easier to focus on timing. It's easier to focus on everything happening around us. But eventually there comes a moment when all of that falls away, and all that's left is honesty. Raw honesty. The kind that can't be hidden behind explanations anymore. And honestly, I think that's where this person is. They're beginning to realize that some of the distance they created wasn't because they didn't care. It wasn't because the connection lacked importance. It was because certain emotions felt bigger than what they knew how to handle. So they stalled. They hesitated. They convinced themselves there would always be more time. But something about that belief doesn't feel as solid anymore. The energy shifts again as Five of Cups appears, and immediately I feel regret. Not dramatic regret. Not self-pity. Just the deep ache that comes when someone finally sees what was standing in front of them. I keep getting the image of somebody looking backward and seeing things differently than they did before. The same memories, the same experiences, the same conversations, yet everything looks different through the lens of understanding. You know, there are moments in life when a person realizes that losing something and appreciating something are separated by a very thin line, and that realization seems to be sitting heavily on this person's heart. Because they aren't only thinking about what happened. They're thinking about what could have happened if they had approached things differently, if they had spoken differently, if they had been more honest, if they had been brave enough to trust what they were feeling. The Hermit appears beside all of this, and the entire atmosphere changes. Everything slows down. I don't feel outside noise anymore. I don't feel outside opinions. I don't feel distraction. I feel solitude, reflection, silence that has become impossible to escape. And Cancer, what stands out to me most is that this silence no longer feels empty. It feels revealing, because every time this person sits with themselves, they seem to uncover another layer of truth, another layer of understanding, another layer of emotion they didn't fully recognize before. It's almost like they're meeting themselves for the first time. Not the version they show other people, not the version built around expectations, the real version, the vulnerable version. The version that actually feels things deeply, and that version keeps leading them back to the same place, the same realization, the same emotional thread running through all of these cards. Because the more they sit with themselves, the harder it becomes to deny what their heart has been trying to tell them all along. Because something feels softer now. Not because every wound has disappeared, not because every question has been answered, but because the struggle to get those wounds the same way is beginning to fade. And Cancer, as I look at the cards, I can feel that shift immediately. The moment death appears, the energy changes. Not in a frightening way. Honestly, it feels like relief. Like someone finally putting down a weight they've carried for so long that they forgot what it felt like to stand without it. I keep seeing old emotional stories falling away. Stories that once felt permanent. Stories that shaped decisions, expectations, and fears. Stories that quietly whispered, protect yourself. Don't trust too much. Don't open your heart too far. But those voices seem weaker now. Not gone, just losing their influence. And wow, there's something incredibly beautiful about that. Because when those old stories begin to loosen their grip, space opens up for something else. Something lighter. Something kinder. Something that doesn't demand survival mode every single day. The star appears, and immediately I feel a deep breath moving through this reading. You know, sometimes healing doesn't arrive as a dramatic breakthrough. Sometimes it arrives as a moment where you realize you're no longer reacting the way you used to. The memory is still there. The experience is still there, but it doesn't control you anymore. And that's what I feel here. Cancer, I don't see someone forgetting their past. I see someone becoming bigger than it. I see someone slowly recognizing that what happened to them is not the same thing as who they are. And that's a very different energy. Because when that realization settles into the heart, hope begins to return naturally. Not forced optimism. Not pretending everything is perfect. Real hope. The kind that grows quietly, the kind that doesn't need anyone else's permission. Okay, Temperance is standing right beside the star, and the atmosphere feels incredibly balanced, almost peaceful. I keep sensing someone learning how to trust life again. Not blindly, not recklessly, just gently. One step at a time, one breath at a time, one decision at a time. There is no rush here. And honestly, I think that's part of the healing. Because for so long, there may have been pressure. Pressure to figure everything out. Pressure to know where things were going. Pressure to understand every emotion immediately. But this energy isn't asking for certainty. It's asking for patience. It's asking for presence. It's asking for trust. As I keep hearing, you don't have to force what is already unfolding. And that message feels important. Because some of you have spent so much energy trying to carry everything yourself, trying to hold everything together, trying to anticipate every possible outcome. Yet this energy feels different. It feels like life is teaching you that not everything needs to be controlled in order to be safe. The Queen of Cups appears, and honestly, Cancer, this feels like coming home. Not to a place, to yourself. The moment this card enters the reading, I feel warmth, compassion, understanding. I feel someone becoming gentler with their own heart, and that may sound simple. But it's actually one of the hardest things many people ever learn. Because it's easy to extend compassion to others. It's easy to understand other people's pain. It's easy to forgive other people's struggles. Yet offering that same kindness to ourselves can take years. The Queen of Cups feels like that lesson finally settling in. I keep seeing someone who no longer wants to fight their emotions, no longer wants to judge every feeling, no longer wants to criticize themselves for being sensitive, caring, emotional, or deeply intuitive. Instead, they're beginning to honor those qualities. They're beginning to understand that their heart has never been the problem. Their sensitivity has never been the problem. Their capacity to love has never been the problem. And as that understanding grows, something inside begins to soften. The walls don't need to be quite so high. The armor doesn't need to be quite so heavy. The future doesn't feel quite so intimidating. Because underneath everything, I see a heart slowly remembering how to trust itself again. And honestly, that feels like one of the most powerful transformations happening anywhere in this reading right now. Because the energy refuses to stay still any longer. And Cancer, I don't mean that in a dramatic sense. I mean there is movement beginning underneath the surface. The kind of movement that starts quietly before anyone can see it. The kind that happens inside a person's heart long before it appears in their actions. And honestly, that's exactly what I'm feeling here. Knight of Cups enters the reading, and immediately I feel someone carrying words they haven't spoken. Not because they don't exist. Not because they aren't sincere. But because finding the courage to express them has taken longer than expected. I keep seeing someone rehearsing conversations in their mind, thinking about what they would say. Thinking about how they would explain themselves. Thinking about whether it's too late to share what has been sitting on their heart. And every time they reach that point, another thought appears. Another hesitation. Another moment of uncertainty. Yet the feelings remain. That's what stands out. The feelings never really left. They simply waited. Okay, there's something incredibly vulnerable about this energy. Because the more I sit with it, the more I realize this isn't about perfect words. This isn't about saying everything exactly right. It's about honesty. Simple honesty. The kind that can no longer stay hidden. And that's when Ace of Swords appears. Wow. The atmosphere shifts immediately. Everything becomes clearer. Cleaner. More direct. I keep hearing someone become tired of carrying emotional weight in silence. Tired of second-guessing themselves. Tired of pretending that certain truths don't exist. Because eventually there comes a point where holding something in becomes harder than speaking. It, and Cancer, that's exactly where this energy feels like it's heading. There is a truth pressing against the surface. A truth that has waited patiently. A truth that no longer wants to remain buried underneath fear, uncertainty, or old assumptions. And honestly, the more this person tries to avoid it, the stronger it becomes. It's like their heart keeps guiding them back to the same realization over and over. Again, the same feeling, the same awareness, the same understanding they can no longer explain away. The Wheel of Fortune begins turning beside Ace of Swords and everything feels different. Not rushed, not chaotic. It's different. You know, sometimes life starts shifting before we realize it's happening. Small things begin changing. Perspectives begin changing. Priorities begin changing. And then one day we look around and realize we're standing somewhere completely different emotionally than we were before. That's what this feels like. I don't see somebody forcing change. I see somebody surrendering to it, allowing it. Accepting that certain chapters have run their course. Accepting that certain truths deserve acknowledgement. Accepting that growth sometimes asks us to move toward what we've been avoiding. And honestly, Cancer, I feel like this shift is happening for more than one person in this connection. The energy feels mutual, like both hearts are standing in front of a doorway neither one could fully see before. King of Cups appears, and the entire reading becomes incredibly grounded. The emotional intensity is still here, but now it feels steadier, more mature, more intentional. I keep sensing someone who has spent a long time trying to understand their feelings, trying to organize them, trying to make sense of them. And after all of that reflection, they keep arriving at the same place, the same emotional truth, the same person, the same connection. And what's interesting is that this energy doesn't feel impulsive. It doesn't feel reckless. It feels considered, thoughtful, deliberate, like somebody who understands the value of what they're feeling because they've spent so much time questioning it. I keep hearing, I know what matters now. Not because everything is perfect, not because every obstacle has disappeared, but because clarity has replaced confusion. And when clarity arrives, decisions become easier, not easy, just easier, because the heart stops fighting itself. Wow! There is such a strong sense of emotional movement here. Not loud movement, not dramatic movement. The kind that happens when somebody finally stops standing still, when they stop waiting for certainty, when they stop asking the same questions over and over again, and instead begin listening to what their heart has been quietly trying to tell them all along. Because what I'm feeling now isn't the energy of chasing. It's not the energy of proving. It's not the energy of trying to convince someone to see your worth. And honestly, Cancer, that's what makes this part of the reading feel so beautiful. The Queen of Cups returns, and the moment she appears, I feel a heart that has become much gentler with itself. Not weaker, not passive, just softer, more trusting, more open. I keep sensing someone who spent a long time pouring energy outward, giving, understanding, supporting, holding space for everyone else. Yet somewhere along the way, they forgot that they deserved the same kindness they offered so freely to others. And now something is shifting, because this Queen of Cups isn't reaching for validation anymore. She's not standing at the edge of a situation wondering if she's enough. She already knows, she already feels it. And that changes everything. You know, there is a certain peace that arrives when you stop measuring your value through other people's choices. When you stop asking why somebody couldn't see what you were offering. When you stop carrying responsibility for things that were never yours to carry. That's what this energy feels like. A quiet return to self-worth. A quiet return to emotional truth. Wow. The King of Cups steps forward, and immediately I feel balance. Not perfect balance. Human balance. The kind that comes when emotions are no longer being fought against. The kind that comes when honesty replaces confusion. And it's interesting because the energy between the Queen of Cups and the King of Cups feels incredibly mature. Nobody is trying to win. Nobody is trying to control. Nobody is trying to prove anything. There is simply understanding, recognition, respect. And Cancer, that's what keeps standing out. This doesn't feel like an old cycle repeating itself. It feels like people growing, learning, becoming more emotionally available than they once were. I keep seeing walls coming down naturally, not because somebody demanded it, because those walls are no longer needed in the same way. And honestly, that's a much stronger foundation than anything built from pressure or fear. The atmosphere becomes warmer as Ten of Cups appears, and wow, this card carries such a peaceful energy. Not excitement, not intensity, peace. I keep seeing simple moments, a relaxed conversation, a genuine smile, the feeling of being understood without having to explain every part of yourself, the feeling of being accepted exactly as you are, and for some reason, that feels more important than anything else in this reading. Because what good is love if you have to become someone else to receive it? What good is connection if you're constantly shrinking parts of yourself just to make it work? This energy doesn't ask for that. It feels welcoming, comfortable, safe, like finally being able to exhale after holding your breath for far too long. Okay, the Empress enters the reading and everything expands. The room feels brighter, lighter, more abundant. Not because something external suddenly appeared, because something internal has grown. Cancer, I keep seeing a new chapter forming here. Not through force, not through struggle, but through alignment, through emotional maturity, through choosing what truly nourishes your spirit instead of what merely fills empty space. The Empress feels like a reminder that healthy things grow naturally. They don't require endless chasing. They don't require constant sacrifice of your own needs. They grow because they are supported. They grow because they are valued. They grow because there is room for them to breathe. And honestly, that's exactly what I see happening around you. A life that feels more authentic. Relationships that feel more reciprocal. Emotions that feel less complicated. A future that feels less driven by fear and more guided by trust. I keep hearing the words, you don't have to fight so hard anymore. And for some of you, those words may hit deeper than you realize. Because you've spent so much time carrying burdens, carrying worries, carrying questions. Yet this energy feels like life slowly placing some of that weight back down. allowing your heart to experience something different, something calmer, something healthier, something that reflects the growth you've worked so hard to create. And the beautiful thing is, the closer you move toward that version of yourself, the more naturally everything that truly belongs in your life begins moving toward you as well. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, Cancer. I truly appreciate every single one of you. And before we close this reading, I just want to remind you of something. You don't have to have everything figured out right now. You don't have to know exactly where every road leads. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is trust the quiet wisdom that's already living inside your heart. Because whether you realize it or not, you've grown. You've healed in ways you may not fully see yet. And the version of you that's emerging now is very different from the one that started this journey. So be kind to yourself. Give yourself grace. Allow yourself to receive the love, peace, and happiness you've worked so hard to create. Thank you again for being here. You all mean a lot to me. And I'll catch you in the next reading. Take care, Cancer. Okay, bye.